Welcome, dear dreamer. The night has come, soft and silver, carrying us into a world of calm. Here, every tree whispers, every star listens, and every step leads deeper into peace. Close your eyes and breathe gently. Let the worries of the day fall away like leaves drifting on water. Tonight, we enter an enchanted forest bathed in moonlight. A wandering prince walks softly among the trees. There, in the quiet glow of fireflies, he meets a fairy unlike any other, a gentle spirit whose silence speaks louder than words. This is a place where love grows slowly, like a flower opening at dawn, where promises are kept by willow trees and lakes that listen, where every heart can rest, every mind see and dream, and every soul can be at peace. So, settle in, dear listener. Let the soft magic of this tale carry you into sleep, and may your dreams tonight be tender, silver, and kind. The evening was gentle. The sky was a cool bowl of blue. The first stars rose like soft candles, one by one, in peaceful rhythm. A hush lay over the meadow. Crickets stitched the silence with thin threads of song. A wandering prince came walking there. He walked without hurry. He walked as if the earth itself were guiding his feet. His cloak brushed the grass. Dew kissed the hem. He had left the lamps of his father's halls behind. He had left the warm talk of the court. He carried no sword, only a canteen, and a small flute lay in his satchel. The air was kind. The wind was slow and silver and sweet. At the edge of the meadow stood the forest. Its trees were old. Their trunks were straight and tall. Their crowns moved like sails, slowly, softly, against the sky. The prince paused and listened. The forest breathed. The forest dreamed. He felt the dream, and the dream felt like home. He stepped between two birches. Their bark shone pale as moonbone. Beyond them, the path narrowed and curled, like a soft ribbon laid on moss. Fireflies lit the way with small, patient flames. They rose and fell, like tiny hearts, like quiet thoughts. He followed their gentle dance. Soon the sounds of the world changed. The meadow's chorus faded. A deeper hush arrived. It came on soft paws. It came with cool breath. It came like wool around the shoulders. Leaves turned toward one another and whispered. Branches spoke in a careful language of creeks. A brook, hidden, sang beneath. The prince smiled at the music of water. It sounded like a promise he had once heard and loved. He walked deeper. He watched. He breathed. He let the forest set the pace. The moon appeared between the crowns of pine. It drifted like a silver boat on a dark lake. He touched the trunk of an ash and thanked it for standing. He thanked the moss for its softness. He thanked the wind for its patience. Gratitude made the darkness bright. Gratitude made the quiet feel warm. It was then he saw her. She stood beside a fallen log where mushrooms made small, white domes, like tiny houses, like soft bells turned upside down. She was slender and still. Her gown was pale as frost. It flowed like mist around her ankles. Her hair was the color of wheat lit by moonlight. Her bare feet rested on the moss, as if the moss were a friend. Wings, fine as spider silk, rested folded at her back. They held a shimmer like dew at dawn. The prince did not speak. He felt speech would be heavy here. Words would be stones dropped into a clear pool. He bowed his head a little. He let his eyes say what his mouth would not. Good evening, gentle one. The fairy looked at him calmly. Her gaze was quiet water. It held no fear. It held a soft sorrow. It held a kindness he knew at once. A small creature, perhaps a dormouse, peeked from the log. It blinked and vanished. The fairy lifted a hand and laid her palm upon the bark. Her fingers were long and graceful. They glowed faintly, like starlight seen through thin cloud. The mushrooms brightened. Their white turned pearly. The log breathed a sigh, as if comforted. The prince felt wonder. he also felt care. He wished to be careful with this moment, to keep it light and gentle. So he took his flute from his satchel. He did not ask permission aloud. He asked with his eyes. He lifted the flute to his lips. He played. The tune was simple. It was the tune the brook had been singing. He had only listened and learned. Now he gave it back, soft and slow, in long, even lines. The notes drifted like feathers. They rested on leaves. They rested on water. They rested upon the fairy's still shoulder. Her eyes lifted to the moon. In their depths, a small star seemed to sway. She took a single step closer, as if drawn by a familiar scent. When the prince finished, he lowered the flute and smiled. She touched her throat with 2 fingers. Then she shook her head, a motion gentle as a falling petal. He understood. She could not speak. He placed a hand over his heart and bowed, deeper now, not as a court gesture, but as thanks to the night. He set the flute down on the moss and sat beside it, a respectful distance away. The ground was cool. The air was sweet with pine. The fairy lowered herself to sit as well, the hem of her gown making a quiet circle on the green. Between them lay the flute, the fallen log, the dormouse house, the small white bells. Between them lay silence, but it was a good silence. It was the kind that listens, the kind that holds, the kind that keeps 2 hearts safe. A breeze moved through. It brought the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. It carried a hush and a silver taste. It turned the fairy's hair to a soft banner. Her wings trembled and settled. She lifted both hands and drew, very slowly, in the air. Her fingers traced a shape, a crescent, a curve, a leaf, a star. Her hands spoke softly. The prince watched. He let his own hands answer. He traced a circle. I am whole. He drew a line that bent like a river. I have come far. He tapped the ground twice. I wish to listen. The fairy smiled with her eyes. She pointed to the mushrooms. She drew a tiny hill. She marked it with little dots. She pressed her palm to the log, then opened her hand as if releasing light. Her meaning came to him like dawn. I heal small homes. I comfort soft places. I am a keeper of quiet things. They stayed until the moon was high. Owls wrote round notes into the dark. The brook turned its song to a slower measure. The prince felt rest settle upon him, a peaceful weight, a soft blanket. He lifted the flute again and played a new tune, one that rose and fell like breathing. When he finished, the fairy placed her hand over her heart and bowed as he had. Then she touched the air and drew a tiny door. She pressed it open with her fingertips. A path of pale light unfurled, narrow as a ribbon, curling toward the deeper trees. She looked back at him, asking gently without words, "Will you walk?" He nodded. He rose. He stepped onto the ribbon of light. It held his weight like moonlight holds a calm lake. He felt no fear. He felt only quiet. Quiet and the soft joy of a right road found. The fairy walked beside him, her steps making no sound at all. So the prince and the silent fairy passed under branches that blessed them with raindrop leaves. They moved between trunks that watched like kind elders. The path brightened a little, then dimmed. It twined with the brook's silver voice and parted again. Ahead, the forest opened like breath. They stopped at the lip of a small glade. The grass there grew short and silky. A pool lay in the center, round as a mirror, round as an eye. The stars rested in it, like scattered pearls. The fairy touched the water and sent the pearls turning. Their light swirled, slow and sweet and peaceful. The prince knelt. He cupped his hands and lifted a little water. It smelled of stone and cloud. He did not drink. He let it fall back. The ring it made was silver and soft. He looked at the fairy and let the question rise in his eyes. What is this place? She spread both arms very slightly, like wings opening to settle on a branch. Her hands shaped the word home. The night breathed. The pool breathed. The hearts of two gentle beings breathed. And somewhere, far beyond the trees, the old world turned in sleep. Morning did not come all at once. It arrived like a whisper. It slipped into the leaves and made them glow from within. It warmed the pool from blue to pale gold. Mist rose in soft veils and drifted in peaceful folds. The prince slept by the water's edge, his cloak drawn as a pillow. He dreamed of silver seeds and soft wings. He dreamed of a voice that spoke without sound. When he opened his eyes, the fairy was already awake. She knelt near a cluster of small blue flowers. They were star-shaped and delicate. She touched each bloom with a fingertip. With every touch, a droplet formed and hung, bright as a tiny moon. The droplets did not fall. They hovered like patient thoughts. They caught the light and held it gently. The prince rose slowly, not to startle the morning. He crossed the grass with quiet steps and knelt across from her. She looked up and smiled. He felt the smile like sunlight on a river. He watched the work of her hands. He learned by watching. He learned the steady pace, the soft pressure, the careful attention. He learned how a bloom can open a little more for kindness. He learned that each flower has a secret name that is not a word. It is a feeling. It is a small warmth. It is a tender note in the larger music. He wished to help. He held out his hands. She nodded, and her wings gave a faint shimmer like a sigh. He touched a flower. He tried to be as gentle as rain. The bloom trembled, then steadied. A droplet swelled at its heart, silver and sweet. He felt a quiet joy. Birdsong began, spare and clear. One voice, then two, then three. The pool reflected a sky the color of soft milk. The forest was waking as if from a deep, peaceful dream. The fairy rose and led him to the water. She lifted a thin reed and tapped the surface 3 times. The pool stirred, rings widened, and met the shore in soft kisses. Shapes appeared beneath, stones smooth as eggs, shells like tiny boats, leaves that had fallen and become golden lace. She traced a spiral in the air. The water answered with a spiral below. The prince's breath matched the motion, in and out, calm and slow. He felt a quiet fullness, like a cup filling without sound. She drew a line toward him, and then toward her heart, a question tender as a feather. Your name? He placed a palm to his chest. Leander, he whispered, because whispers belong to places like this. He spoke the name as a gift laid on soft cloth. Her eyes brightened. She touched the air and wrote with invisible ink. Letters formed from light itself, thin and graceful. Leander, they spelled, hanging above the pool for a moment, before sinking like gentle stars. She smiled. Her own name followed, rippling on the surface, then rising like breath on cold glass. Saela. The letters lingered, and then drifted apart into shining dust. Saela, Leander repeated, tasting the shape. He did not say it again. The name did not want to be a drum. It wanted to be a bell rung once and remembered. He spent the morning in quiet work. They lifted fallen twigs from the water. They laid them beneath the elder tree, where the soil was soft and dark and kind. They gathered leaves that had turned to lace and arranged them in a spiral, a slow dance of gold and brown. They listened to the brook speak softly to the roots. They listened to the wind read from the book of pine. When Leander grew thirsty, Saela cupped her hands. Water rose to meet her palms as if glad to be held. She tilted her hands toward him. He drank slowly. The water was cool and sweet and clean. It tasted like a promise kept. It tasted like a quiet yes. At midday, light slid down the trunks and laid itself in soft bars upon the grass. Leander sat with his back to a willow, and Saela leaned against the other side. The tree held them both like a gentle elder. Between them, the trunk was warm. Above them, the leaves made a silver murmur. It sounded like stories told to sleeping children. He took his flute and played again. But this time the notes were even softer. They were small and round. They rolled like pebbles in a shallow stream. Selah closed her eyes and listened. Her lashes cast faint shadows on her cheeks. Her hands rested open, ready to receive anything the music might place there. A calm, a dream, a memory like a pale stone. When the tune ended, Selah stood and plucked a willow leaf. She held it like a quill. On the air, she wrote a line that curved and looped. It sketched the shape of a path, narrow and light. Then she tapped her chest and drew a tiny house with no walls, just a roof of stars, just a floor of moss, just a door that was always open. Leander understood that her home was not a single place. It was the feeling the forest made when it was fully itself. It was the soft weight of quiet. It was the silver patience of water. It was the peaceful way light sits upon a leaf and does not hurry away. He asked, with a motion of his hands, if she had always lived here. Selah tilted her head. She drew a small crown, then a far horizon, then a tiny boat. Her fingers made the boat rock. Then her hand opened like a flower and grew still. A journey, Leander thought. A leaving, a long, soft passage from a realm of rules to a realm of listening. He felt no need to know the reasons. The reasons were seeds. Some sprout, some sleep. All belong to the soil of a life. Afternoon drifted toward evening. Shadows lengthened like calm thoughts. The pool grew blue again and took back its stars. Selah moved her hands in the water and coaxed light to gather like dew upon the surface. She used it to write a circle, wide and slow. At the circle's edge, she placed the lace leaves they had gathered, one by one, a crown of pale gold around a mirror of night. Leander watched the simple ritual. He felt its care. He felt how soft repetition makes a thing sacred. He asked, with the tilt of a head and a touch of palm to heart, if he might place one leaf himself. Selah nodded. He took a leaf that looked like the memory of a leaf and set it at the northern edge. He pressed it there lightly with 2 fingers. The pool answered with a ripple that felt like a small, peaceful laugh. When the circle was complete, Selah raised both hands and gathered the air, as if folding a blanket. The fireflies arrived as if called. They came in slow drift, in silver trickle, in gentle pairs. They rested around the pool, and on the willow, and on Leander's open palms. The glade became a sky turned inward. Stars above, stars around. Stars held in small living lanterns. Selah stepped close. She looked into his eyes. In hers, he saw the lake, the willow, the delicate blue flowers. He saw a sorrow, quiet and old, but softened by patient days. He saw gratitude too, gratitude like a small fire held in careful hands. Leander bowed his head, simple and true. He felt the bond growing like a root underground. It did not rush. It did not strain. It reached in silence toward water. It reached toward warmth. It reached toward a shelter of green. He played one last tune, slow as sleep. Selah placed her palm over the flute's end and caught the final note. She lifted it like a bubble and placed it on the pool. It floated there, silver and round, then sank without breaking. Night held them. The willow watched. The pool dreamed. And Leander and Selah, 2 gentle hearts, rested in the glade of quiet waters, where love begins not with thunder, but with a soft and listening breath. There are many ways to speak. There is the way of the tongue. There is the way of hands. There is the way of footsteps on a path, and the way of a hand's warmth left on bark. There is another way as well, a way the forest had taught Selah long ago, the way of light. On the 3rd evening, as the moon lifted like a silver lantern, Selah led Leander farther upstream. The brook grew narrower there. It leaped over stones that hummed softly. Ferns arched like green feathers. The air was cool and kind. The wind wore a hush. Owls drifted between branches like thoughts, changing rooms. They came to a place where the water widened into a basin. not as round as the pool, more like a cupped hand. Above it drooped a branch heavy with glassy berries. They were not for eating, they were for dreaming. Sayla touched one berry, and it glowed pale. She touched another, and it glowed softer still. As if listening, Leander watched her lift a berry and hold it to the moon. Its light filled like a small jar catching rain. When she lowered her hand, the glow remained a quiet, steady glimmer, the color of pearl. She placed the berry upon the surface of the basin. It did not sink. It lay there like a sweet boat. Then, with one finger, she traced in the air above it. The berry shivered, and from its skin, a thread of light unwound. It fell onto the water and wrote a line, a curve that turned like a smile, a small rising stroke, a dot like a star. Leander breathed the shape in. He felt it rather than read it. A memory came, the first time he had seen the sea, the way it breathed without hurry. He understood the line to mean gentle. He understood it to mean welcome. Sayla handed him a glowing berry. He weighed it in his palm. It was light and soft. He lifted it, wondering. He traced a short line and then another. The berry answered. Light unspooled, like quiet silk. It touched the water and steadied. A circle, then a second circle, one inside the other, both thin and even. Sayla's eyes asked him softly what he had written. He smiled and touched his chest, and then the air around them. Home within home, he meant. Peace inside peace. He had found a little home inside himself, a small room of calm, and inside that a smaller room, and in that small room, a lantern that did not burn out. The forest had given him the key. Sayla moved closer. Her wings brushed the air with a sound like pages, turning slowly. She traced a line of light that met his circles and followed them. Not to change them, but to accompany them. The lines eased together like two hands that know one another well. They wrote more. They wrote with light the way friends write letters and leave them at a threshold. They wrote about the willow's silver murmur. They wrote about the soft crown of lace leaves around the pool. They wrote about the way a reed becomes a wand if touched with care, and the way a stone warmed in sunlight seems to remember and share that warmth all night. Some lines held sorrow. Sayla wrote a small empty cup. She wrote a path that ended at a cliff but did not fall. She wrote a hand reaching and then folding to the heart. Leander answered with a long, soft line that curled back to meet itself. He drew a shore for the cup to rest on. He drew gentle waves that brought small offerings, shells, petals, and a smooth seed. He did not ask for the story of her sorrow. He gave her a quiet shore where sorrow could sit and breathe. They learned each other in this way, not by questions, but by presence. They learned the simple good work of tending small things. They learned the patient way love moves. Not a shout, but a moth's wing. Not a blaze, but the silver drift of moonlight on water. When they grew tired, they let the berries drift and dim. The light wound back into skin and became seeds again. Sayla gathered the dim berries and laid them in a shallow nest of moss. She placed her hand above them and gave a little warmth. The moss breathed back a sweet scent. Leander lay on the bank with his hands behind his head. The stars looked close enough to touch. The wind stroked his hair with cool fingers. He spoke one sentence aloud, very soft, as if speaking to a sleeping child. Thank you for your quiet. Sayla turned her face toward him. Her eyes were deep and clear. She touched the place in the air where his words had been. With a slow motion, she laid them on her heart. She covered them there with her palm, like someone tucking a letter into a pocket. They did not move for a long time. Time itself softened and lay down beside them. Somewhere, a fox stepped through fern and left no mark. Somewhere, a night flower unfolded and lifted a pale cup to the stars. The forest listened to its own breathing and found it peaceful. At last, Sayla rose. She lifted one hand and wrote a single shining word upon the water, a word that neither of them needed a tongue to speak. The word was stay. Leander nodded. He felt the word pass through him like silver wind. He closed his eyes. He dreamed of willow leaves falling as slow as snow. He dreamed of a small boat of light, rocked in a palm-shaped basin. He dreamed of a fairy's silence that said more than 1,000 songs. The night deepened, the basin slept, and the letters they had written in light sank slowly into the soft, dark seeds for tomorrow's gentle bloom. Morning returned like a soft hand upon a brow. Light came gently through the leaves, not in a rush, not in a blaze, but in thin, silver threads that stitched the forest back to wakefulness. The air felt fresh and kind. The pool's skin was smooth as glass. The willow breathed a quiet hymn. Leander rose slowly, so as not to disturb the peaceful hush. Selah was near the water, kneeling among moss and fern, her fingers moving with the calm rhythm of prayer. Today she tended the ground as if it were a book to be read and cherished. She parted the moss with care. She lifted old leaves the way one lifts a page. She laid tiny seeds in tiny hollows and pressed the green blanket over them again. Every motion was small and gentle and sure. Every motion said, "Be at peace, grow in peace." Leander watched for a while, letting the stillness do its slow work in him. Then he knelt beside her and placed his hands upon the earth. The soil was cool, like water that remembers a moonlit night. He breathed with the gentle pace of the forest. He let his breath be a blessing. He let his breath be a simple yes. Selah handed him a pinch of pale seeds, light as dust, light as a sigh. They shone faintly, as if remembering a star they had once seen. She pointed to a small crescent the moss had made, a silver curve around a stone. He understood. He opened the moss a little and tucked the seeds into the soft dark. He closed the green again with 2 fingers, the way one would tuck a child beneath a blanket. They worked in this quiet book for a long, peaceful while. They did not hurry. They did not count time. The sun moved across the branches like a slow, kind clock. The wind turned pages, and each page was green and soft and sweet. Sometimes, Selah drew a line of light on the air to show where a root ran underfoot. Sometimes, Leander traced a circle to mark a place where water paused to listen. They gardened with their hands. They gardened with their listening. They gardened with their still hearts. When the morning ripened toward noon, Selah stood and touched her throat with 2 fingers. Then she set her palm upon the earth. She closed her eyes. A quiet hum rose, too soft to be called a note, too soft to be named, a tender vibration like a sleeping bird's breath. The ground answered. It gave a little shiver of joy. In the crescent of moss, the soil swelled and sighed. Leander felt the hum move through him, gentle and silver and calm. He set his own palm beside hers. He did not try to make a sound. He simply offered warmth. He offered the wish that small things might thrive, and that thriving might be slow and peaceful. The first sprout came just before noon. It was pale, then green. It lifted like a tiny hand, asking to be held. Another sprout followed, then 3 more. Each leaf was soft as a moth's wing. Each stem drank light the way a heart drinks hope. The glade felt brighter, not by candle, not by flame, but by a sweetness that rose from the ground itself. Selah smiled, soft and true. She tapped the air and traced a spiral over the newborn greens. She wrote the word welcome without a word at all. Leander answered by placing a flat stone nearby, warm from the Sunday. On the stone he laid 3 willow leaves, overlapping like a little roof, a house of shade for the tiny lives, a peaceful shelter of silver green. They ate a simple meal at the pool's edge, a handful of berries with a soft bloom like dusk, a crust of bread Leander had wrapped in his cloak the night before, water cupped from the pool, cool and clean and sweet. They ate slowly. They ate the way one reads a poem, line by line, with quiet attention. After, Selah lifted a reed and drew upon the water's skin. The lines were so fine, they seemed to be the water remembering a story. She drew a small plan for the garden, a ring near the willow for shade plants, a bright ribbon along the brook for flowers that love light, a peaceful cluster near the stone for herbs that speak softly to tired hearts. Leander traced his agreement, adding small dots where stepping stones might go, so that feet could pass without pressing the new green. They began again. They moved in slow, gentle circles. Where they found a place too crowded, they thinned with care. Where they found a bare patch, they laid a patchwork of moss like a quilt. Selah gathered fallen twigs of the same length and set them in a soft square, a tiny frame. In the frame, she scattered silver seeds the size of dew. Leander built a path of flat pebbles, leading to it, a little road for beetles and dreams. All afternoon, the garden took shape. Not a showy garden, not a grand garden, a listening garden, a garden that loved smallness and made room for it. The willow watched with a silver murmur, pleased. The pool kept the skies calm. The brook added a soft-spoken song. Fireflies slept in the shade, resting their lanterns for the evening's gentle work. As shadows lengthened, Selah lifted a hollow acorn cap and filled it with a pinch of dark dust. She touched the cap to the water, and the dust drank. She carried it to the garden's tender heart and poured the soft drink at the roots. Leander smelled something sweet, like rain that remembers blossoms. He looked at Selah, asking with his eyes. She drew a small moon and then a seed. She crossed the two and let them shine. Moon water for moon seeds, night comfort for night growth. They sat to rest. The new leaves trembled in the silver wind. The moss held them steady, soft as a mother's hand. Selah cupped her palm and brought it to her ear, as if holding a shell. She listened to the leaves. She nodded, her eyes warm. Leander tried it too. He lifted a hand of air to his ear and breathed. He found that if he grew very quiet, if he set all his edges down, he could hear a faint, tiny rhythm. Not words, not music, a pulse of life, a small, peaceful yes. He closed his eyes. He let the yes enter him the way light enters water, dissolving into gentleness. He thought of his father's halls, all stone and echo. He thought of the road that had led him here, soft and silver and kind. He thought of the garden in his chest, once neglected, now tended by calm and care. He laid a hand upon his heart. Under his palm, a sprout lifted. When he opened his eyes, Selah was watching. She placed her hand upon her own heart in answer. Between them, the new garden breathed. 2 small moths drifted through and settled on a sprout. Their wings opened and closed like quiet prayers. A dragonfly stitched a silver line across the pool and vanished into the reeds. The forest dimmed to a soft, sweet dusk. Leander took up his flute. He did not move to the center. He stayed at the edge, as one does in a sacred place. He played 3 notes. He let them drift and fall like feathers. He played 3 more, and then 3 more, each set soft and slow. The notes made a pathway of sound, stepping stones across evening. Selah lifted both hands and shaped the air around them, guiding the music to the tender leaves. The leaves seemed to listen. The leaves seemed to dream. When the last note rested upon the moss, Selah drew a circle of light in the air, wide and gentle. The fireflies woke. They rose in a quiet cloud and hung above the beds like a silver ceiling. She beckoned to Leander with the smallest motion. He came and stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. Together, with 4 slow breaths, they blessed the garden. Not with words, with presence, with patience, with a soft, peaceful wish that everything small might have time and space to become itself. Night deepened. The fireflies dimmed to a low glow, like embers under snow. The pool held the stars. The willow combed the dark with gentle fingers. Selah set a tiny bell of mushroom at the path's head. Not to ring, to remember, to say, "This place is quiet. Enter softly, leave softly, love softly." Leander spread his cloak near the willow, and Selah lay upon the moss a little way off, wings folded like a soft shawl. The garden breathed between them like a sleeping child. The wind smoothed their brows. The moon laid a silver hand upon the tender beds and whispered a lullaby the earth has known since the first leaf opened. And somewhere, beneath the moss, beneath the soil, beneath the hush, the seeds they had sown turned in their sleep and dreamed of gentle rain, of soft dawn, of a peaceful sky. They dreamed of lifting without hurry. They dreamed of silver and quiet and love. Tomorrow would bring another small chapter to tend. Tonight the garden story was a single, steady line. Rest. The garden had grown one quiet day, then another. The new leaves lifted their small faces to light. Moss curled around their ankles like a blanket. The brook hummed its gentle hymn, and the willow combed the hours with silver sighs. Leander and Selah tended each sprout with patience, with stillness, with love that asked nothing but to remain. On the third evening, twilight came softer than before. Clouds drifted slow as boats on a silver sea. The air was cool and tasted of rain that might or might not fall. Selah moved with calm purpose. She gathered a bundle of hollow reeds, each cut with care. She tied them with a braid of grass. Her eyes shone like one who remembers an old promise. Leander watched her steps. She walked to the pool and dipped the reeds, one by one. The water filled them with a hush, and the reeds glowed faintly, as if each held a moon thread. She placed them in a circle on the moss. With her hand, she drew a star over them. 5 slow strokes. The reeds trembled, their mouths shone. From them drifted a fine dust of light, softer than pollen, finer than frost. The air brightened. Fireflies stirred and gathered. They came not to shine, but to listen. They formed a ring above the reeds, a crown of waiting lanterns. The forest grew still. Even the brook hushed its song to a whisper. Selah lifted her hands and shaped a bowl in the air. The light dust fell into it, gathering like silver flour. She turned to Leander. Her gaze asked gently, "Will you share?" He knelt. He cupped his hands as she had. A shimmer passed from her palms to his. The dust rested in his hands, light as breath, cool as moonlight. It felt alive. It felt like hundreds of sleeping hearts, each beating slowly, each waiting to be placed. "What is it?" he whispered. But the sound seemed too heavy. He let the question soften into his eyes instead. Selah smiled with her silence. She traced a small seed in the air, then she drew a moon above it. She touched her brow, and then his. He understood. Seeds of silver. Seeds that sprout not in soil, but in dreams. Seeds to be planted in the night. Together they carried the bowls of dust to the garden. They bent low over each sprout, each tender leaf. They blew softly, like one blowing warmth onto cold hands. The dust settled on the leaves. It melted into them like dew. The leaves trembled and grew calm, as if a lullaby had been laid upon their small shoulders. Leander felt peace move through him. It was like holding a lantern in his chest, one that glowed without flame. He breathed it out with every exhale. He gave it to the garden, to the moss, to the willow's roots. When the last seed had been planted, the reeds dimmed. Their glow sank back into the water. The fireflies descended and rested on the leaves, as if guarding a newborn. Selah pressed her palms to the ground. She closed her eyes. She listened. Leander followed her gesture. He pressed his palms too. At first, he heard only the soil's stillness. Then, he heard a faint sound. Not loud, not strong, a chorus of tiny beats. Each sprout spoke softly, one word only, alive. The night answered with stars. They spilled across the sky like a river of silver. A hush swept the forest. It was the hush of a page turning, the hush of breath before sleep. Selah and Leander lay side by side near the garden, their heads upon moss. The air smelled of pine and rain. Selah lifted her hand once more and drew a circle above them. Within the circle, she placed 3 stars, then another, then another, until the sky itself seemed to bend down and rest upon the garden. She lowered her hand and touched Leander's. He clasped her hand gently, not as one holds possession, but as one holds a cup of water. Soft, careful, grateful. They lay like that while the fireflies drifted, while the pool mirrored the sky, while the seeds of silver whispered their small, patient songs. Sleep came without asking. It came as a soft tide. It came as a cool wind. It came as the willow's shadow stretching wide and kind. In that sleep, Leander dreamed of walking among stars. Each star was a seed. Each seed was a heart. And every heart said the same word in silence: peace. When dawn came, the garden breathed differently. Its leaves were greener, its stems straighter. The moss shone with dew like pearls. The air was scented faintly with sweetness, as if blossoms unseen had opened in the dark. Selah and Leander rose, looked upon their work, and bowed not to each other, but to the garden, to the forest, to the gentle night that had made such small miracles. The willow gave a sigh, soft and silver. The brook resumed its hymn. The fireflies dimmed and drifted to their hidden beds, and the two gentle souls walked hand in hand to greet the day. Hearts lightened, hearts blessed, carrying with them the hush of silver seeds that grow in silence. The day was calm. The sky drifted in wide, slow waves of cloud, white upon blue, blue upon white. Sunlight fell in silver bars through the trees. The brook moved like a ribbon unrolling. The garden of silence grew with small, steady breaths. New buds lifted. Moss deepened its green. The air smelled of soft earth and faint sweetness, as if the forest itself had spoken a blessing. Leander and Selah walked side by side. They did not hurry. Each step was light, each pause long. The willow awaited them at the edge of the pool, its branches trailing like a curtain of dreams. Its trunk was wide, strong, and calm, a heart rooted in listening. They came to sit beneath it. The bark was warm, touched by the gentle Sunday. The shade was cool, soft as a cloak laid across the shoulders. Leander leaned against the trunk. Selah sat beside him, her wings folded, her gown flowing like pale water across moss. For a time they said nothing, for nothing needed to be said. The willow spoke with its hush. The brook whispered with its silver hymn. Birds stitched the silence with bright threads, short and sweet. The world felt round and whole. After a while, Selah lifted her hand. She drew a circle on the air, wide and slow. She placed a star inside, then another, then a third. She touched the circle to the bark of the willow, as if to anchor it. Leander watched. He placed his palm on the trunk and over her circle, and felt a deep, quiet hum. The tree was old. The tree was wise. It had heard many vows. It had carried many secrets in its rings. Selah turned to him. Her eyes were soft, clear, and full of patient light. She traced two small figures in the air, one crowned with a curve, one with wings. She drew them beneath the circle she had made on the bark. Then she pressed her hand to her heart, to the tree, and back to her heart again. Leander understood. A promise, not written in words, not bound by law, but by stillness, by trust, by the gentle strength of roots and water. He lifted his flute. He played 3 notes, low and even, then 3 more, higher, like light on water. He played until the air around them grew silver, until the willow leaves swayed in rhythm. When he stopped, he pressed the flute to his chest, then to the bark, then back to his chest. His promise was the same: to be present, to be gentle, to remain. Selah smiled. She placed her hand over his on the trunk. Together, they let the vow sink down, down into the roots, down into the soil, down into the dark, where seeds dream and waters keep their hush. The tree answered with a sigh that trembled through branch and leaf, a silver shiver of blessing. The afternoon drifted like a slow river. They stayed beneath the willow, tending small tasks. Selah wove grasses into a ring, and set it on the moss. Leander gathered smooth stones and laid them in a spiral. Together they shaped a circle of calm, a quiet altar to listening. When the sun tilted west, the light turned golden. The branches glowed like threads of silk. Selah rose and walked to the water's edge. She touched the surface, and a ring spread outward, wide and silver. She traced another figure, 2 hands joined. She looked back at Leander. Her silence spoke gently. Together, he joined her. He set his hand beside hers on the pool. Their 2 rings spread and met, becoming one. The water shimmered. The reflection of their faces touched and wavered and became still again. Evening came, slow and tender. Fireflies lit their lanterns one by one, hanging among willow leaves. The garden rested nearby, its sprouts tucked into the hush of night. The brook sang softer now, a lullaby. The air cooled, and the first star rose, clear and patient. Leander lay back on the moss, Selah beside him. The willow bent its branches low, as if to cradle them. Above, the sky stretched wide and silver, a soft river of stars. He turned his head, her eyes met his. No sound, only light. No word, only presence. He reached out, not to take, but to share. His hand found hers. They stayed like that, palms touching, hearts steady, breath calm. The promise beneath the willow was not bound in fear. It was not chained in duty. It was a promise of gentleness, a promise of care, a promise of listening. The stars heard it. The willow kept it. The earth welcomed it, and the night closed gently around them, silver and soft, sealing their vow with peace. The dawn returned with its silver hush. Mist curled low across the pool. The willow's branches dripped with dew, each drop shining like a pearl that wished only to fall gently. Selah rose before the sun was high. She walked along the moss, her steps lighter than a feather's breath. Leander followed, keeping his tread as quiet as he could, though the earth welcomed every step without complaint. They did not speak. The day itself spoke for them, soft winds stirring, water humming low, birds waking in short, sweet bursts of song. Selah lifted her hand and pointed toward a narrow path hidden between 2 elder trees. It was shaded, silver-lined, and alive with the promise of journey. The path wound like a ribbon, pale and green. Moss lined its edges. Ferns bowed in gentle greeting. The trees leaned close, as if wishing to share secrets and whispers. Leander felt the air shift, cooler here, softer still, as though each step drew them deeper into the heart of peace. Their footsteps made no harsh sound. They were soft, like petals falling. They were soft, like leaves drifting in slow circles. Each step carried them farther, yet nearer farther from the courtly world of voices and crowns, nearer to the quiet truth they were learning to share. Selah paused where the brook crossed the path. It ran shallow here, its surface broken into tiny silver mirrors. She bent, touched the water, and looked up at Leander with a small smile. She motioned with her hands. Step lightly, step with trust. He nodded. Together they crossed, barefoot, the water cool and playful around their ankles. Each stone pressed beneath their feet felt alive, humming softly. When they reached the far bank, Selah touched her hand to her heart, then to his. He understood. Thank you for walking gently. The path climbed a little hill. At its crest, the trees opened. Before them lay a meadow wide and calm. The grass swayed in long, slow waves. Wildflowers nodded their bright heads, blue, white, and gold. Bees moved from bloom to bloom, humming low, unhurried. The sun was soft here, not sharp, laying itself upon the meadow like a warm shawl. Selah walked ahead, her gown brushing the grass. Leander followed, the air filled with the perfume of flowers. They found a stone at the meadow's heart, flat and round. Upon it, Selah spread her hands and drew the outline of wings. The air shimmered faintly. A hush deeper than before settled, as if the meadow itself were listening to her memory. Leander watched. He sat beside her and placed his palm on the stone. He closed his eyes and breathed. He let the quiet sink into him. He felt the meadow's peace press against his heart, gentle and steady. When he opened his eyes, Sayla was gazing upward. He followed her eyes. Clouds drifted slow, like ships across a silver sea. One cloud spread wide, shaped like an open hand. Another curved, shaped like a cradle. The sky itself seemed to tell them, walk softly, live gently, rest within peace. They stayed a while. They lay on the grass, listening to bees, listening to wind. They let the minutes dissolve like sugar in warm water. Nothing hurried, nothing demanded. Each breath was full. Each breath was enough. When the sun bent toward the west, Sayla rose. She motioned to the trees beyond the meadow. She drew a line in the air, curving like the path. Then she tapped her hand to her lips and shook her head. A reminder, let the journey be quiet. They entered the trees again. Here the path grew narrow, shaded by oak and birch. Mushrooms glowed faintly at the roots. The air was cooler still, filled with the scent of damp bark and fern. Their footsteps fell as whispers. Sayla paused to touch a tree, her palm resting against its skin. She bowed her head, then moved on. Leander mirrored her. At each tree, he placed a hand, not to claim, but to thank. Each trunk answered with a stillness that settled into his chest. At last, the path brought them back to the pool, to the willow that had heard their vow. The garden lay nearby, its leaves shimmering with evening light. The young sprouts had lifted higher, their faces turning toward the sky's softening glow. They sat again beneath the willow. The path had not taken them far, yet it had carried them deep. They had walked the way of listening. They had walked the way of gentle trust, and every step had spoken without a word. We are together. We are at peace. We are home. The willow lowered its branches in blessing. The brook sang a silver hymn of return. The meadow dreamed behind them. The garden breathed beside them, and the path of soft footsteps lay within them now, a path they could carry wherever they wandered. Night came quietly, with stars like slow lanterns. Sayla and Leander rested side by side, hearts steady, palms touching, and breath calm. And in the hush of the willow's shade, they knew the path of soft footsteps would always lead them back to peace. The night had passed in gentle hush. Stars kept their watch like lanterns hung high, and the willow bent low in quiet blessing. When the first light of dawn touched the forest, it came not as fire, not as blaze, but as silver breath upon the leaves. Mist curled along the brook, drifting slow, soft as silk. Sayla stirred first. Her wings shimmered faintly in the new light. She touched Leander's hand with the lightest brush, and he opened his eyes as though waking from a dream that had carried him through silver fields. Together, without a word, they rose and followed the brook. Its water called them onward with a hush, a murmur, a promise. The path was gentle. Moss grew thick underfoot, cool and kind. Ferns lifted their arms like guardians of peace. Every tree leaned a little, as if wishing to watch. Their footsteps were soft, rhythmic, a quiet hymn of two hearts walking together. At last, the trees parted, and the brook widened. Before them stretched the listening lake. Its surface lay smooth as glass, so still it seemed to hold its breath. The sky rested upon it pale rose, soft gold, silver blue. Every color was calm, every line unbroken. The world above and the world below were one. Sayla stepped to the water's edge. She bent and touched her fingertips to the lake. Rings spread outward, slow, peaceful, widening into silence. Leander knelt beside her. He cupped the water and let it fall again, watching the circles meet hers, joining, merging, becoming one. They sat there in stillness. The lake listened, the sky listened, their hearts listened. Even the birds were quiet, as though the world itself wished to hear the hush. Sayla lifted both hands and shaped a cradle in the air. Light gathered there, soft as dew, silver as moon. She lowered the cradle into the water, and the light dissolved into ripples. She turned to Leander. Her eyes held the meaning. The lake keeps what we give. It holds every promise, every gentle word, every breath of peace. Leander placed his flute upon the shore. He did not play. He laid it down as an offering, as a seed of sound to rest in silence. He pressed his hand to his heart, then to the water. His vow sank into the stillness, joining hers. The sun rose slowly, pouring gold across the lake. The mist parted in long strands. The water became a mirror of light. Selah leaned her head upon Leander's shoulder. He laid his cheek against her hair. They breathed together, slow, calm. Even as the day unfolded, the lake shimmered. In its depth, Leander saw visions. The garden growing in soft silence, seeds sprouting beneath silver moons, paths of moss winding like gentle songs, the willow bending low in blessing. He saw the quiet love between himself and Selah, growing steady as roots, calm as stars, endless as dawn. Selah raised her hand one last time. She traced the word peace upon the air. The letters glowed, then drifted down and rested on the lake. The surface accepted them, carried them outward, and made them part of the sky reflected there. Leander closed his eyes. He whispered a single word, not to break the silence, but to join it. Rest. The sound was soft, light as a breath. Selah touched the air where the word had been and pressed it gently to her heart. The lake listened, the forest listened, the day listened, and together they kept the promise to remain gentle, to remain kind, to remain quiet. As the sun rose higher, the light fell warm across their faces. The breeze moved slow, silver, sweet. The garden behind them grew. The willow dreamed, the meadow swayed, and the lake, vast and calm, held every promise like a treasure. Leander and Selah sat hand in hand, wrapped in silence, wrapped in peace. Their hearts beat soft, steady, one with the rhythm of the world. And as the day fully bloomed, the story of the prince and the silent fairy became not just a tale, but a blessing whispered across water and sky. May your heart be gentle. May your steps be soft. May your dreams be silver and quiet. And may you rest in peace and in love until morning.
Rest in peaceful dreams.